Audrey Lane brought the gavel down. Lot 23, she announced, a dusty wooden case tagged in marker, old junk.
Gary Reeves held up the medals, grinning. Dad's old participation trophies, folks. Start the bidding at $10.
Audrey's gavel rose again. $10. Do I hear 10? These are? Vintage.
Frank Reeves's throat seized. He swallowed hard and looked down at his scuffed shoes.
But 3 rows back, a silver-haired man in a dark blazer had stopped breathing. His hand moved to his chest. He pushed through the crowd with quiet determination, his stride clipped and unmistakably military. Reaching the table, he lifted the citation from the case as if it were a live grenade. The paper trembled in his grip. His jaw locked, and the color drained from his face. He looked up slowly, scanning the laughing guests until his eyes found Frank by the oak tree. And, for the first time in 40 years, the general understood exactly what his old comrade had never told a soul. 2 hours earlier, Frank Reeves stood on his porch watering geraniums while the morning heated the sidewalk.
The garden was the one place he could keep the noise inside him quiet. Then Gary's black sedan took the corner.
Gary leaned out the window. Morning, Dad. Got a killer idea. I'm hosting a charity auction next weekend. He stepped onto the grass, smiling wide. Thought I'd grab some of your old war stuff. You never look at it anyway, right?
He meant the medals. He always meant the medals, and he never once asked what they cost.
Frank's hand tightened on the watering can, but he didn't turn around. He just listened to his son's footsteps cross the porch.
Inside, Gary pulled the wooden case from the closet shelf. Look at this, medals and a yellowed paper. This'll get a laugh at the auction.
50 years of carrying a war inside his chest, and his son called it a laugh line.
Gary dropped the case into a cardboard box alongside old golf trophies and sealed the flaps with a strip of clear tape. When the car drove off, Frank lowered himself into his armchair and stared at the empty nail where the shadow box used to hang. Frank stood at the edge of his son's backyard, watching guests swirl past with champagne glasses and practiced laughter.
Gary worked the crowd like a seasoned politician, slapping backs. Just wait till you see the auction items, some real treasures in there.
Frank pressed his shoulder into the oak tree and thought, I haven't felt this invisible since I came home from the jungle.
Audrey Lane arranged the auction lots with brisk efficiency. The metal case sat between a chipped vase and a stack of old vinyl.
Audrey glanced at the tag, pursed her lips. Lot 23, listed as old junk. Well, I've read worse descriptions.
Gary snatched the case and held it high. This is the highlight, folks. My dad's Dusty War souvenirs. Bidding starts at pocket change.
Frank's fingers curled. He could still feel the outline of a ribbon bar that hadn't been pinned to his chest in decades.
The tag, Lot 23, old junk, was written in Gary's careless handwriting. Behind the glass, the silver star caught the sun.
If he could just walk over and take it back. But the old shame locked his throat, the way it always did.
The guests settled into white folding chairs, chatter fading as Audrey stepped to the podium. The auction was about to start. Audrey tapped the gavel. The first items moved fast, a signed baseball, a crystal vase. Laughter rippled through the rows.
Gary leaned toward the mic. All for a good cause, people. Bid like you are at a real auction.
Frank stood apart, fingers laced behind his back, watching his son hold court as if the whole yard belonged to him.
Audrey lifted the wooden case. Lot 23, folks, described here as, well, old junk. Let's start the bidding at $5.
Gary shouted, Come on, $5 for a piece of history. My dad carried those through some jungle somewhere.
The words, some jungle somewhere, landed like gravel in Frank's throat. He didn't cough. He didn't blink.
A woman in the front row giggled. $5. Another called $6. Gary clapped his hands. At the back, a dark blazer appeared. Gary excused himself, shaking the newcomer's hand. General Martin, so glad you made it. The general nodded curtly, scanning the tables with a practiced eye. He'd spent a career reading rooms and finding threats. His eyes paused on the metal case. For a beat, he didn't move. Then something behind his expression hardened. General Martin stepped past the chatting guests. His focus narrowed to the wooden case on the auction table.
Audrey noticed him. General, we're in the middle of, but he wasn't listening.
He lifted the citation from the case. The same way he'd once lifted orders in a command tent, his eyes tracked across the typed lines. Name, unit, date, the words Silver Star, and with valor. Beneath that, a note in faded ink, recommended for further honor, submitted to higher command. His jaw tightened. The paper shook once, then steadied. He looked up sharply, scanning the crowd with the cold precision of a man who'd led men into fire. Frank, still by the oak tree, felt the weight of that stare before he saw it.
Why is he looking at me like that? Nobody's looked at me like that since.
The general's fist closed around the citation. Behind him, Gary's voice called out, $7, going once. General Martin's voice cut through the chatter. Stop the bidding. Where did you get those medals?
Gary's smile slipped, but he forced a laugh. Relax, General. Those are just my dad's old souvenirs from the service.
Souvenirs? These are Silver Star citations. Someone earned these in blood.
Yeah, well, he never talks about it. Probably just routine stuff.
The general's jaw tightened. He pointed toward the oak tree. Frank Reeves, 3rd Battalion, 1968. That's you, isn't it?
Frank's mouth went dry. A tremor ran through his hands. Just say it. Yes, you were there.
He gave a single, stiff nod. Yes, I was there. The auction stalled. Glasses stopped clinking. Audrey's gavel hung midair.
You were there. Do you remember the hill they called the Meat Grinder?
Frank shut his eyes. For the first time in 50 years, someone was asking the question he'd been avoiding.
I was a forward observer in that region. Sergeant. I heard stories about a Sergeant Reeves who held a hill when the odds said none of his men should walk off it.
Frank's eyelids lifted, but his gaze stayed fixed on the ground, as if looking up would make the past real again.
There were a lot of Reeves. Could have been someone else.
Not this one. The report said he was from Beckley, West Virginia. Same as the name on the citation.
The color drained from Frank's face. 50 years of silence pressed against his ribs like a locked door.
Gary stepped between them, arms spread. Okay, enough. This is my fundraiser. Whoever you think he is, let's finish the bidding.
This isn't about your fundraiser. It's about a man who saved lives and never asked for a parade.
A single tear slid down Frank's cheek, catching the afternoon sun.
Operation Iron Harrow. Day 3. You led a counter-assault when the perimeter was breaking. You don't have to hide it anymore.
Frank's voice was barely a rasp. Iron Harrow. I haven't spoken that name in 50 years.
You dragged 3 wounded men back, one at a time. The report said you refused to fall back. That earned the Silver Star. But there's a second note at the bottom.
He read aloud the faded type, recommended for the Medal of Honor, submitted to higher command. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Audrey's gavel slipped and hit the podium with a hollow thud. Frank lowered his head, a shudder moving through his shoulders. He didn't speak. He couldn't.
The recommendation was lost. The medal was never awarded. This man has carried the sacrifice but not the honor.
Gary stood rigid, his champagne glass tilting. He didn't notice the wine soaking his sleeve. A woman in the front row pressed her hand to her heart. The yard had become a chapel of held breath.
Frank Reeves was recommended for the Medal of Honor, and I intend to see it pinned to his chest.
Frank's hands trembled. For once, the silence didn't feel like hiding. It felt like relief.
Gary forced a chuckle. Loud enough for the back row. A recommendation from 50 years ago. Anyone could have typed that.
The general's glare cut him off. I typed it myself. I was the adjutant who submitted that recommendation.
He reached into his blazer and pulled out a worn military ID, holding it high for the crowd to see.
I was there when the paperwork was lost. I've been searching for Frank Reeves for years.
Frank's composure shattered. A sob tore from his chest, raw and long buried.
I left them there. Miller, Thompson, Jones. They never came home, and I got to stand here for 50 years.
The crowd stood motionless. Someone in the second row lowered their champagne glass to the grass.
You brought them home by being the man who didn't run. That's not something you earned alone. You carried it for them.
Frank's legs buckled, and he gripped the oak tree to stay upright, the bark digging into his palm. Gary's face went slack. The smirk was gone. He looked at his father as if seeing him for the first time.
I bid $1,000. Not for the medals, for the right to give them back.
The yard filled with new bids, people waving hands, trying to outdo each other out of stunned respect.
$5,000. Every dollar will go to your fundraiser, but these medals are not for sale.
Audrey's gavel came down once, twice. The crowd stilled. A third stelled, a third strike, and the auction was over. The general lifted the wooden case and crossed the grass toward the man by the oak tree.
I've been searching for you for years. Sergeant, you've carried this long enough. It's time to let the country thank you.
Frank's hands, gray-streaked and calloused, took the case. He held it like a child holds a candle in a storm. The crowd, first one clap, then dozens, rose and filled the afternoon with the sound that should have echoed 50 years ago. The general put a hand on Frank's shoulder and murmured a promise about a formal ceremony. Behind them, Gary stood motionless, the host of a party that no longer belonged to him.
This man deserves more than an auction. I am calling the Pentagon right now to arrange a formal representation.
The party watched in silence as the general dialed, his voice clipped and official, nodding once with grim satisfaction.
Audrey stepped forward, her voice unsteady. The auction proceeds. They should go to a veterans fund. This shouldn't be about profit.
Frank nodded, his voice barely a whisper. Give it all, every cent.
Gary pushed forward, trying to reach his father, but a wall of shoulders met him. Guests closing ranks, their backs turned. He called out something that might have been "Dad," but the applause swallowed it whole.
The general lowered the phone. It's done. Next week, Sergeant Reeves will receive the Medal of Honor, as he should have long ago.
The applause that followed was different, low, reverent, the sound of a debt being acknowledged. Frank caught Gary's eye across the yard. There was no smirk now, only the raw edges of regret. Gary turned away, shoulders curled, and walked toward the darkening edge of the yard alone.
Walk with me, Sergeant. A war like ours doesn't leave a man just because he comes home.
They moved past the empty chairs and abandoned champagne flutes into the long shadows of the oak tree.
I still see Miller's face. He was 19. I carried him back, but it was too late. For 50 years, I told myself I didn't deserve to talk about it. They died, and I got old.
You didn't get old by accident. You froze on that hill because they were counting on you.
All this time, I thought if I didn't speak their names, it would hurt less, but it only buried them deeper.
The general placed a hand on Frank's shoulder, and for a moment neither man needed the war to define what passed between them.
I've been trying to find the man from that hill for decades. The record said you were from Beckley, but the name was wrong. When I saw the citation today, I knew.
On the other side of the yard, Gary sat on a fallen garden crate, elbows on his knees, staring at the trampled grass. Frank looked toward his son's silhouette, then back to the general. For the first time, the silence felt like a beginning. The next morning, the story hit the local news. By noon, 3 television vans were parked on Frank's quiet street. Frank sat in his armchair, the metal case on his knee, when the first reporter knocked. Across town, Gary's phone vibrated on his granite countertop. Message after message. Former guests, now furious.
He read the texts without blinking. You sold your dad's medals for a champagne toast. I am embarrassed I was there.
Frank's kitchen door opened without a knock. The general stepped inside, a crisp envelope in his hand.
The Pentagon moved faster than I expected. The ceremony is confirmed. 1 week, he placed the envelope on the armrest.
Frank opened the letter, his eyes tracking over the official seal and the date. He nodded once, like the soldier he used to be. On a park bench, 3 miles away, Gary stared at a phone that had stopped buzzing. The silence was worse. Frank stood on his porch that evening, the letter folded in his pocket. The news vans had gone. The flag above him barely moved.
He whispered to no one, "I guess it's time to let them know."
The next evening, as the last light drained from the sky, a black sedan rolled silently to the curb. Gary climbed out, his suit rumpled from 2 days on his back, his eyes raw.
Frank set down his coffee cup. He'd known this knock was coming since the party.
The knock came. 3 hesitant raps. Frank pulled the door open.
Dad, I need to talk to you. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought they were just old trinkets. I am so sorry.
You never asked.
He didn't shout. He simply closed the door, the latch clicking softer than any goodbye.
He stood frozen, the wood inches from his nose. The porch light snapped off.
Inside, the general rose from the armchair. He gave a single solemn nod. On the porch, Gary pressed his forehead to the doorframe and let the tears come. Frank stood before the mirror, buttoning the dark suit jacket he had worn only once to his wife's funeral. From the drawer, he lifted a cracked wooden frame, a grainy photograph of 8 young men in fatigues, squinting into a jungle sun.
He traced the faces with a fingertip and whispered their names: Miller, Thompson, Jones, Rinaldi, Perez, Carter, Singh, Bell.
The kitchen door opened without a knock. General Martin set a bottle of whiskey on the table.
I haven't worn a uniform in 50 years. I'm scared I won't remember how to stand.
You stood on a hill with shrapnel in your leg. Standing straight for what you earned won't be the hard part.
They raised their glasses in silence, the clink of crystal, the only sound. Frank drained his. Across town, Gary sat on a park bench, head in his hands. In his apartment, a suitcase lay packed by the door.
He'd called a cab, then canceled it. Couldn't face the crowd. Couldn't face the crowd. Couldn't face his father. But he couldn't run either.
Frank stepped onto his porch, the jacket still buttoned, and looked down the empty road where the morning would bring reconciliation or a reckoning. Frank stood outside the municipal building, the morning sun glinting off the brass buttons of his only suit. A long black sedan pulled up. General Martin stepped out, his dress uniform starched and perfect.
Ready, Sergeant? The honor guard is waiting.
Frank nodded, and they walked together into the auditorium where flags hung like silent witnesses, the rows filled with uniforms, families, and news cameras. The last chair squeaked. At the back, a side door opened. Gary slid into a shadowed seat, shoulders hunched, unseen.
His throat clenched when he saw his father on stage. The man he'd called junk now looked like a monument.
General Martin took the podium, his gaze sweeping the crowd until it settled on Frank.
Frank's heart beat a rhythm he hadn't felt since the jungle. Alert, alive, and afraid.
The ceremony was moments away. Somewhere in the back, Gary wiped his eyes and waited. The general leaned into the microphone, voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced every breath.
We are here to correct a 50-year oversight. On a hill in a place called Iron Harrow, a young sergeant refused to fall back. When the perimeter broke, he dragged 3 wounded men, one by one through fire that should have killed him. His actions earned the Silver Star, but a recommendation for this nation's highest honor was lost in the chaos of war.
Frank's hands lay still on his knees, but the knuckles were white. In the third row, a Vietnamese veteran in a wheelchair lifted a trembling hand to his brow. Near the exit, Gary Reeves pressed his fist to his mouth. His shoulders shook.
This man carried the silence longer than any soldier should. Today, we finally honor what he would never ask for.
The auditorium was so quiet that when a single tear hit Frank's knee, it was audible. The general stepped back, and the honor guard lifted the velvet case. The pinning was moments away. The velvet case opened, and the Medal of Honor caught the light like a fallen star. General Martin pinned it to Frank's jacket, his fingers steady, his eyes unblinking. He stepped back, and in one sharp motion raised his hand to his brow. Frank Reeves lifted his trembling hand and returned the salute. His tears fell without shame. The auditorium erupted, a wave of applause that pulled everyone to their feet. At the back, Gary Reeves stood clapping until his palms stung, his face streaked.
The general's eyes were glassy. "It is done, Sergeant. Welcome home."
Cameras flashed, capturing the image of Frank, tears streaming, hand still at his brow. Gary clapped harder, the shame and pride twisting in his chest, until he couldn't breathe. The general lowered his hand, and for a long moment, the room was only the sound of gratitude. As the last applause faded, Gary Reeves stumbled forward, his face raw with tears.
Dad, I can't fix what I did. I am begging you, please. He dropped to his knees, the carpet biting his shins.
Frank bent down, his old hands gripping Gary's shoulders.
Stand up, son. I've been waiting 45 years for you to ask a question.
He pulled Gary upright, and the two men held each other, the embrace broken and fierce.
I'll ask. About the war. About everything. I am so sorry, Dad.
General Martin watched from the wings, his arms folded, then dipped his chin once.
Just ask me what it was like. That's all I ever needed.
Gary nodded against Frank's shoulder, the metal cold between them, and in the silence of the empty hall, Frank Reeves felt the weight on his chest shift from burden to honor. Frank Reeves turned back to the microphone, the metal heavy on his chest, and raised a hand to quiet the last murmurs.
I want to announce that every dollar from that auction, my son's fundraiser, will go to a veterans fund, and I've decided to start talking. At schools, VFW halls, anywhere they'll have me.
The audience didn't clap this time. They hummed with a noise that felt like a promise being sealed. Gary, standing at the aisle, nodded through his tears, his father's words finally reaching somewhere deep. General Martin walked to Frank and shook his hand with both of his, holding the grip longer than protocol allowed.
Leaning close, the general said, "I told you they'd be watching, and they were."
A reporter near the stage called out, "Mr. Reeves, how does it feel to finally be recognized after all this time?"
Frank touched the medal, his voice steady as it had ever been, heavier than I thought, and lighter too.
As the crowd filed out, Frank stayed on stage, looking at the worn photograph he had carried in his pocket all day. A November sun, bright and low, lit the parade route. Frank Reeves sat in a classic car, the Medal of Honor gleaming on his blazer. Beside him, Gary Reeves held a folded American flag. He didn't wave at the crowd, he just watched his father. Children pressed against the barriers, waving tiny flags. A neighbor snapped a picture on her phone. After the parade, they walked to the granite wall. Frank reached out and traced the names with a trembling finger.
He read the names aloud. Miller, Thompson, Jones, the same ones he had whispered a year before.
Gary stood a step behind, capturing the moment on his phone, his throat tight. That evening, on the quiet porch, Gary brought his father a cup of coffee and sat beside him without a word. The medal caught the last light. They didn't speak about the war, they just sat together, and it was enough. Above them, the American flag swayed gently. The neighborhood was quiet, and for the first time, so was Frank Reeves. Some honors are never worn, they're carried. In the blue light of early morning, Frank Reeves sat at his kitchen table, the metal case open before him.
He touched the star with a fingertip, not as a man touching a prize, but as a man touching a grave.
Gary's footsteps on the porch were softer now. No knock, just the screen door's familiar creak. He carried 2 mugs of coffee and sat down beside his father. No one spoke the first word. The photograph of 8 young soldiers sat between them, not as a weapon, but as a bridge. Frank finished his coffee and stood up. Gary looked up, and his father placed a hand on his shoulder. Inside, the metal case closed with a soft click. The old photograph leaned against it, facing the room. From the porch, Gary watched the street wake. The flag stirred above the mailbox. In the kitchen, Frank didn't look at the medals. He looked at the empty chair where his wife used to sit and smiled. Some honors are never worn, they're carried. And Frank Reeves had finally learned to carry them with grace.